The homeless woman's hands moved through Levise's hair with a tenderness that made my chest ache. Smooth, practiced, gentle, like she'd done this 1,000 times before, like she knew us. Every morning for 3 weeks, we'd found her at the abandoned stagecoach stop on our way to school, waiting with that distant smile and those careful fingers. She never spoke, never asked our names, just braided our hair in patterns our mama used to make. The same exact patterns. Lavisa thought it was kindness. I thought it was impossible, because our mama had been dead for 6 months. And the braid she was weaving into my sister's hair, that was mama's signature. The one she'd invented herself. The one she'd never taught anyone. The one that died with her. Or so we thought. Every morning, as the sun barely peeked over the horizon, we walked the dusty dirt road to school. The world still wrapped in early morning haze. The old stagecoach stop stood alone on the edge of town, weathered wood and broken windows that hadn't seen a passenger in years. But every morning there she was, the woman, sitting on the old bench under the tree, the one with the crooked branches. And every time she waited for us. Her hands, though worn by age and weather, moved with a grace that felt both foreign and familiar. Her fingers glided through Levise's tangled hair with such care, weaving the strands together into a braid I knew all too well. It was the same one Mama used to do every morning before we went to school. The three hearts intertwined braid, one we'd never seen anyone else do. It was Mama's thing, a secret between us. And yet, here was this stranger, so calm, braiding Levise's hair in a way that made my heart stop. The pattern was perfect, just like Mama's. Levisa giggled in delight as the woman's hands worked, the sound of her innocence filling the air. She had no suspicion. She just trusted as always. She didn't question anything. She just let the woman do her thing. It was easy for her to believe in this kindness. But for me, I felt something colder, something that made the hairs on my neck stand up. There was no way this woman could have known that braid. No way she could have learned it. Not unless she knew Mama. I stood there, watching from a distance, my arms crossed over my chest, my eyes narrowing. Every morning, the woman sat there in that same spot. And every morning, the braid grew tighter, the pattern more perfect, as if she was following a map only she could see. I wanted to believe it was just coincidence. But deep down, something told me this was no accident. It all started 3 weeks ago when we first found her. Lavisa and I were walking to school like usual, the grass wet with morning dew. The woman had just been sitting there when we passed by, barely noticeable at first. She looked up at us with a soft smile, her eyes tired but kind. She didn't ask if we were okay or if we needed anything. She simply gestured to us, her hands moving in a gentle invitation. Lavisa had no hesitation. She skipped right over and sat next to the woman without a second thought, as if they'd known each other forever. I hesitated. My protective instincts kicked in, but I couldn't deny the comforting silence she offered. When Lavisa sat so easily, I finally followed. The woman didn't speak a word. She just reached for Levisa's hair and, without asking, began weaving it into that braid. That impossible braid. The one Mama used to do. The one I thought was lost forever. We started coming back every day. It wasn't a decision we made. It just became part of our routine. Something about the ritual, about the way the woman treated us like we mattered, like we were worth her time, made it hard to resist. I never told Lavisa what I was thinking. I never mentioned how strange it all was. She didn't need to know. She had already lost Mama. I couldn't bear to make her feel like she was losing something else, even if it didn't make sense to me. Life after Mama died had been unbearable. 6 months had passed since the accident. The night the rain had come pouring down in sheets, and Mama was out there on that muddy road trying to bring medicine to Sarah. She was trying to save her. She didn't make it. The wagon overturned in the storm, and we lost everything that night. Papa withdrew into himself. He stopped talking. His grief turned him into a shadow. And Lavisa? She wouldn't accept it. She talked to Mama's photograph every night and set a place for her at the dinner table, hoping somehow she would come back. I try to hold things together, to make it okay, to make it seem like everything was fine. But I wasn't fine. We weren't fine. Mama used to braid our hair every morning. She had a way of doing it that made us feel like everything would be okay, no matter what the world threw at us. And after she died, I tried, God knows I tried, to keep that tradition alive. But it wasn't the same. No matter how much I practiced, no matter how hard I tried to get the strands just right, it always felt wrong. I was never going to be Mama. And that was the hardest thing to accept. That first morning, when I noticed the scent, the faint, familiar smell of lavender, it nearly knocked me off my feet. The same scent Mama used to wear. The smell of the flowers from her garden. I didn't say anything to Lavisa. I couldn't, but I couldn't shake it off either. Who was this woman, really? How did she know us so well? How did she know Mama's braid? How did she know that smell? What was going on? As we walked away that morning, Lavisa skipped ahead, touching her perfect braids with joy. But I glanced back at the woman. She sat watching us with tears streaming down her weathered face, her hand pressed against her heart. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this wasn't simple kindness. This woman knew us. The question was how? The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had learned. The woman at the Stagecoach stop, our nanny, hadn't spoken a word, but the way she had looked at me with those familiar green eyes, the same eyes Mama had, told me everything I needed to know. But as much as I wanted to confront her, to understand how everything had happened, I couldn't bring myself to do it just yet. I needed time to process, to make sense of what I had discovered. I needed to figure out what to do with the truth. I thought about the letters, about Mama's words, about the love that had been kept hidden for so many years. And then I thought about Lavisa. She didn't know any of this. She was still so innocent, so full of hope, and I couldn't bring myself to shatter that. I couldn't tell her that the woman who had been braiding her hair every morning, the woman she trusted, was the one who had caused Mama's death. No, not yet. Not until I had more answers. So I decided to keep the secret for a little while longer, but my mind wouldn't let it go. The more I thought about the woman's eyes, the more I wondered if she knew something more, something deeper about our family's past that Mama had never shared. I needed to know what she was hiding. What had she been trying to protect us from? That day, I watched her carefully as she braided Lavisa's hair again. Her hands moved with the same tenderness, the same quiet grace, but there was something different in the way she looked at me this time. It was like she knew I was watching her, that I was finally starting to understand. As Lavisa skipped off to school, her hair perfectly braided once more, I stayed behind, lingering near the Stagecoach stop. The woman's back was turned, but I saw her wipe her eyes quickly as if she was trying to hide her tears. And then she hummed again, the same tune. I froze. The lullaby Mama had sung to us. The one that had been so familiar to me as a child, but had faded from my memory over the years. I hadn't thought about it since Mama passed, but now, hearing it again, it stirred something inside me. It was like a memory, half forgotten, coming back to life. I had no more. I had to understand how the woman knew that song, how she knew us. I didn't wait for her to finish the braid before I stepped forward. My heart raced, my feet moving before my mind could catch up. "Why do you hum that song?" I asked, my voice trembling. She turned slowly, those familiar green eyes meeting mine. Her face softened with a sad smile, and she reached for my hand, pulling me gently toward her. I hesitated for a moment, but something in her gaze told me it was okay. She pointed to her throat and shook her head, the same gesture she had made the day before. She couldn't speak, but I could see the emotion in her eyes. She reached into her worn bag and pulled out something small, something carefully folded. It was a piece of paper, yellowed with age, crinkled at the edges. She handed it to me. I unfolded it slowly, my hand shaking. It was a song, Mama's lullaby, written out in neat handwriting. The words I had heard so many times as a child. 3 hearts beating, never apart. Morning light, keep them in sight. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the paper, the words written in Mama's hand. How did the woman have this? How did she know this song, this secret between Mama and us? The woman pointed to the paper, then to her heart, then back to me. It was as if she was trying to tell me something that I wasn't fully understanding. But all I could think was that this woman, this stranger who had come into our lives so suddenly, knew things about us that no one else did. Things that only Mama had known. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I looked at her, trying to piece everything together. How could this woman have been part of Mama's life and yet not have been part of ours? Why had Mama kept her a secret? What had happened between them? The woman seemed to sense my confusion. She reached into her bag again and pulled out something else, a faded photograph, folded in half. She held out to me, and this time I didn't hesitate to take it. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, revealing a picture of a young Mama, no more than a teenager, standing in front of the same stagecoach stop where the woman sat every morning. But that wasn't what made my heart stop. It was the other woman in the photo, the older woman standing beside Mama, their arms around each other. The woman was smiling, but her eyes were full of sadness. I stared at the picture, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. The woman in the photograph, the one with Mama, was the same woman sitting in front of me now. The woman who had been braiding Levise's hair every morning. The woman who had been watching us. My blood ran cold. I had seen this woman's face every day for weeks, but now, seeing her in this photograph, I realized something else. Mama had known her. This woman wasn't just a stranger. She was family. She was our grandmother. I looked up from the photograph, my mind spinning. The woman watched me silently, her eyes full of sorrow and longing. I felt a rush of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion. I had so many questions, but no answers. "Your Mama's mother," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. My heart broke for her, but at the same time, I felt betrayed. Why had Mama never told us about her? Why had she kept this woman a secret? I looked at the photograph again, trying to understand. The woman, our nanny, had been a part of Mama's life. She had held her, loved her, and yet Mama had never spoken of her to us. My hands shook as I folded the photograph back up, my mind reeling. This wasn't just about a lost family member. This was about everything Mama had kept hidden, everything she had kept from us. It was about the love and the pain she had carried all her life, and the secrets she had kept to protect us. And now, here was this woman, this nanny, standing in front of me, carrying all that pain, all that love, and a secret that had been buried for so long. The question I couldn't stop asking was why? Why had Mama told us? Why hadn't she brought this woman into our lives sooner? And more importantly, why had she kept us in the dark? There was only one way to find out. I needed to confront Sarah, to ask her the questions that had been burning inside me for so long. But the answers, I knew, wouldn't come easily, and I wasn't sure I was ready for them. I woke up the next morning with a heavy heart, my mind still reeling from everything I had discovered about the woman at the stagecoach stop, our nanny. The photograph of Mama and her mother, the letters, the song, everything was crashing down on me, and I still didn't have all the answers. I kept wondering why Mama had kept this part of her life a secret, why she hadn't shared it with us. It didn't make sense. I had always known that Mama had a difficult past, but I never imagined this. I thought about how, for the past few weeks, the woman had been coming into our lives, braiding Levise's hair, humming Mama's lullaby, knowing things about us that no one could have known unless they had been there before. I thought about the sadness in her eyes, the way she watched us so carefully, as if she was waiting for something, waiting for me to understand. The day before, I had asked her directly if she was Mama's mother. She hadn't said a word, but her eyes, the tears she couldn't hide, had spoken volumes. I couldn't shake the image of her face, the quiet acceptance of her past, the pain she carried in her heart. I had no more. I couldn't leave it like this, with so many questions and no answers. I decided to go back to the woods that afternoon. I needed to find her, to speak to her. I had to know the whole truth. I couldn't keep this secret from Lavisa, not when it affected both of us so deeply. When I arrived at the woods, the stagecoach stop was quiet, the air still. I could see her sitting by the old tree, her hands folded in her lap as if waiting for me. Her eyes locked onto mine the moment I stepped into view, and I felt the same pull, the same sense of something unfinished between us. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her presence was enough. I walked up to her slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to ask her everything. Why she hadn't come to us sooner, why Mama had kept her hidden, why she had stayed away for so long. I took a deep breath, and as I sat down beside her, I blurted out, "Why didn't Mama ever tell us about you? Why didn't she bring you into our lives? Why didn't we know?" The words felt harsh as they left my lips, but I didn't care. I needed to know the truth. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. She simply looked at me, her eyes full of something deeper than sorrow, regret, maybe, or perhaps something even more complicated. She reached for her bag again, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She handed it to me without a word. I unwrapped it carefully, my hands trembling with anticipation. Inside was a small stack of papers, more letters, but these were different from the ones I had read the night before. These were written in Mama's handwriting, but the ink was fresh, the paper unmarked by age. I flipped through the letters quickly, trying to make sense of them. They were addressed to Sarah, our nanny, and they spoke of things I never expected, things that Mama had never shared with us, things that had been buried in silence for so many years. The first letter was dated 10 years ago, when Mama was 25, a young woman with a life ahead of her, but one weighed down by the longing for something she could never have, her birth mother. In the letter, Mama had written about how she had spent years searching for Sarah, trying to find her, to understand who she was and where she had come from. She spoke of her longing, her need for answers, for closure. And then she wrote about the day she found Sarah. It was a reunion, but one filled with sadness. Sarah had been living in the woods, struggling with poverty and illness. She had been too ashamed to show herself, too afraid to be seen. But Mama had found her, and they had reconnected in secret. Mama had kept their relationship hidden from everyone, even Papa. She had kept it from us. But why? The second letter was the hardest to read. Mama had written it just days before she died, and it was full of the kind of raw emotion I had never seen from her before. She spoke of how she had been keeping secrets, secrets about Sarah, secrets about her own past, and how she had tried to protect us from the pain of that past. She wrote about the night she died, the night the storm came. She had been coming to bring Sarah medicine, to save her, to help her one last time. But the road had been treacherous, and the wagon had overturned in the rain. Mama had died on that night, trying to help the woman who had given her life. It was then that I understood. I understood why Mama had kept Sarah hidden. She had done it to protect us. She had kept the secret because she didn't want us to know about the pain of her past, about the struggles Sarah had faced. She had kept Sarah in the shadows because she didn't want us to see the truth that Sarah had been a part of Mama's life, but not in the way we had imagined. Mama had loved Sarah, had tried to bring her back into our lives, but the timing had always been wrong. And when Mama had died, the secret had died with her. But now, the truth was finally coming out. Sarah had been part of our lives all along, even if we hadn't known it. She had been there, watching over us from a distance, waiting for the right moment to come forward. She had stayed away because Mama had asked her to. She had stayed hidden because Mama had wanted it that way. I couldn't blame Sarah for that. I could see now that she had only done what Mama had wanted. But it still hurt. It still felt like a betrayal. And it made me wonder, what else had Mama kept hidden? What other secrets had she kept from us? I looked up at Sarah, who was watching me with those same green eyes, the same eyes that Mama had. She didn't say anything, but her eyes spoke volumes. She had done everything Mama had asked of her, even if it meant staying away, even if it meant living in the shadows. I realized then that Sarah wasn't just a woman with a past. She was part of our family, part of the story Mama had never told. And now, she was here, in front of me, waiting for me to accept her, to understand her. I didn't know if I could do that right away. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. It was time to face it. Time to bring Sarah out of the shadows and into our lives, no matter how complicated it was. Because in the end, she was family, and family was everything. The truth of Mama's death weighed heavily on me. But what hurt more than the pain of losing her was the realization that it could have been avoided. I couldn't stop thinking about that night, the night Mama had died. The night she had gone out into that storm to bring Sarah medicine, to save her. The guilt, the grief, it was all too much. I hadn't expected to feel such anger towards Sarah, but there it was bubbling up inside of me, hard and hot. She had been the reason Mama died. If Mama hadn't gone to her that night, if Sarah hadn't needed saving, Mama would still be here with us. I couldn't help but feel that it was Sarah's fault. I tried to suppress the anger, tried to keep it buried, but it was eating away at me, and I couldn't escape it. All I could think about was how much I missed Mama, how much I needed her. I wanted to scream at Sarah, tell her that it was her fault Mama was gone. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't true. Mama had chosen to go. She had chosen to die for Sarah. But the pain, the anger, it was still there, and it felt so unfair. I had to confront Sarah. I had to tell her what I was feeling, let the anger out before it consumed me. I couldn't keep pretending it didn't hurt. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay when it wasn't. So, the next day, I went to find her. She was sitting by the Stagecoach stop again, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze distant. She didn't look up when I approached, but I knew she could feel me there. I took a deep breath and spoke. "You killed her," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "Mama died because of you." The words hit the air between us like a slap, sharp and harsh. She didn't flinch, didn't back away. She just looked at me with those same sad eyes. She didn't try to explain, didn't try to defend herself. She simply reached for a piece of paper and a pencil. With shaky hands, she began to write, slowly, carefully. She wrote, "I know. I live with it every day." My chest tightened as I read her words. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it was the truth. She wasn't defending herself, wasn't making excuses. She knew what had happened. She knew what Mama had done for her. I felt my anger start to shift, start to twist in a new direction. I had thought Sarah had done this to Mama, that she was the cause of Mama's death. But now I saw something else. Sarah wasn't the one who had made Mama go. Mama had chosen to do it herself. Sarah had simply been the person Mama loved enough to risk her life for. And in that moment, I realized something important. Sarah wasn't the enemy. She was just a woman who had lost so much, a woman who had been separated from her daughter for years, a woman who had never been given a chance to be part of her family. And now, she was sitting in front of me, carrying the weight of all that loss, all that grief. It wasn't her fault. It was Mama's choice, and I had to come to terms with that. I sat down beside her, feeling a weight lift off my chest as I let go of some of my anger. She continued writing, her words coming slowly but steadily. I tried to stay away. I tried to honor her wishes. But when I saw you both, I couldn't stay away any longer. I couldn't watch you struggle without a mother. I couldn't watch you miss the love you deserved. Her words broke something inside of me. She had watched us from a distance, had seen the pain in our eyes, and it had torn her apart. She had stayed away because Mama had asked her to, but now she couldn't help but reach out. I thought if I could braid your hair, if I could give you a small piece of what you had lost, maybe it would make up for all the time I'd lost. The tears that had been threatening to spill finally came. I couldn't help it. I felt the flood of emotions that I had been holding in for so long. I had been angry at Sarah for something that wasn't her fault. She wasn't the one who had chosen to go into that storm. Mama had. Sarah had just been a mother who wanted to be part of her daughter's life. But the world had taken that away from her. And now, she was sitting in front of me, vulnerable and broken, offering what little she had left. It was hard to reconcile that with the image of the woman I had blamed for everything. But as I looked at her, I saw something different. I saw the woman who had loved Mama, who had tried so hard to stay away, who had been too afraid to come forward and risk disrupting our lives. I saw a mother, a grandmother, who had been lost for so long and was finally finding her way back home. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The words felt too small, too insignificant compared to everything we had lost. But they were all I had. Sarah's eyes softened, and she reached out to take my hand, her grip warm and firm. "I know," she wrote, "and I'm sorry too." The tears came harder now, but they weren't angry tears. They were the tears of someone who had finally begun to understand, who had finally let go of the hurt and accepted that sometimes love is messy and grief is complicated. We sat there for a long time, holding hands, both of us crying, both of us broken in our own ways. But in that moment, something changed. I realized that the anger I had been holding onto was only keeping me from healing. It was keeping me from seeing the truth, from seeing Sarah for who she really was. Not the woman who had caused Mama's death, but the woman who had been part of Mama's life, who had been trying to find her way back to us. And as I sat there with Sarah, as we both wept for the loss we had suffered, I knew that, eventually, we would find our way forward. We would heal, together. That evening, as I walked home from the woods with Lavisa, my heart was heavy. I had spent the afternoon with Sarah, listening to her silent confessions, and I could feel the weight of everything she had said pressing down on me. I knew now what had really happened that night. I understood why Mama had died, but understanding it didn't make it any easier to bear. I had spent so many months trying to make sense of the emptiness that Mama left behind, and now the truth was finally out. It wasn't just that she was gone. It was that her death had been an act of love, a love that was too strong to deny. She had chosen to go into that storm to save Sarah. She had died trying to protect the very woman who had given her life. The thought of it all, of everything that had been kept from us, made me sick with confusion. And there was one person who needed to know the truth. The one person who had been in the dark just as much as we had. Papa. But telling him, I realized, would be harder than anything I had ever done. He had been broken since Mama's death, unable to speak or even look us in the eye without that deep, distant sadness. He had always been the strong one, the protector, but now he was just a shell of the man he used to be. How could I tell him that the woman he had married, the woman he had loved, had kept such a big secret from him? How could I tell him that Mama had been searching for her birth mother for years, keeping it hidden even from him, and that her death had been caused by her attempt to bring that woman home? I knew Papa would never forgive her for that. He had always carried the weight of grief with him, but this would crush him completely. He had always been a man of pride, and he would never understand why Mama had kept Sarah hidden, why she hadn't told him the truth. I tried to imagine what it would be like for Papa to hear all of this, for him to know that Mama had been keeping a secret so large, so painful, and that she had died because of it. I was terrified. I didn't know how to bring it up to him, how to explain everything without breaking him even more than he already was. But I also knew I couldn't keep this secret from him. The truth needed to be told. When we got home, I found Papa sitting at the kitchen table, his face tired and worn. He didn't even look up as Lavisa and I walked in. There was no anger in his eyes, no frustration, just emptiness. I stood there for a moment, watching him, wondering if I could find the strength to speak. Lavisa went to him, as she always did, wrapping her arms around his legs and looking up at him with that innocent, unwavering trust. I stayed where I was, frozen in place, trying to gather the courage to say something, anything. Finally, I took a deep breath and walked over to the table. Papa still didn't look at me. I could feel the weight of the moment, the heaviness of what I was about to say. "Papa," I said, my voice shaking, "there's something you need to know. About Mama." His head turned slowly, and his eyes locked onto mine. There was a flicker of recognition in his gaze, but it was brief. I could tell he was tired, too tired to care about anything too tired to fight whatever was coming. I had no idea how to say it, how to make him understand, but the words spilled out anyway. Mama didn't die just because of an accident. She died because she was trying to save someone. She was going to bring medicine to someone she loved. Papa's expression didn't change. He just stared at me, waiting for more, his eyes dull, as if he had already heard enough pain to last a lifetime. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep going. Mama's mother, Sarah, she was the one Mama was trying to save. She was in the woods, sick, and Mama went out in that storm to help her. But the road was too dangerous and the wagon overturned. Mama died trying to bring Sarah home. The silence that followed was suffocating. Papa's face didn't change. He didn't move a muscle. It was like he hadn't heard me at all, like he was trapped in his own world of grief, unable to process what I had just said. "Papa," I said softly, trying to get his attention. "Mama was trying to bring Sarah into our lives. She kept it a secret from us, from you, but she never stopped loving her. And now, Sarah is here. She's our nanny." The words hung in the air, waiting for a reaction, but Papa didn't say anything. He just sat there, his hands trembling slightly, his eyes clouded with emotion. I could see that he was struggling, trying to understand, trying to make sense of everything. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stood up slowly, his body stiff, his face unreadable. He walked to the window and stared out into the darkening night, his back to me. I couldn't read him. I didn't know if he was angry or confused, if he was grieving all over again or just trying to find some way to cope. But after a long moment, he spoke, his voice low and hoarse. "I always wondered," he said, his words thick with emotion, "why she was always so sad, why she never talked about her past, why she kept so much to herself. I thought it was just grief. I thought she was just mourning her own loss. But now, I see. She was carrying something heavier. She was carrying the weight of her mother's absence." His shoulders slumped, and he put his hands in his pockets. "I should have known," he murmured. "I should have asked her more about her past. I should have known there was more to her pain than I realized." I didn't know what to say. What could I say? Papa was right. Mama had carried that secret with her all her life. She had never told him the truth, never shared the burden of her past. And now, he was finally learning the truth, but it was too late. "Where is she now?" Papa asked quietly, his voice breaking. "Sarah, where is she?" I took a deep breath. "She's in the woods, Papa. She's living there alone. She's afraid you'll hate her for what happened to Mama." Papa didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his hand resting on the windowsill, staring into the darkness. And then, after what felt like a lifetime, he turned to me, his face filled with a mixture of grief and determination. "Get your shawls," he said quietly. "We're going to bring your nanny home." Lavisa gasped, her face lighting up with joy. But as I looked at Papa, I saw something different. His hands were trembling, and I knew that this wasn't going to be an easy reunion. Sarah wasn't just some stranger who had appeared in our lives. She was Mama's past, and that past was full of pain and secrets. I didn't know what would happen when Papa and Sarah finally met face to face. But I knew this was the moment that would change everything. We had all been living in the shadow of Mama's secret for so long, and now it was time to bring that shadow into the light. Would Papa be able to forgive Sarah? Or would the truth tear us apart forever? I didn't know, but I knew one thing for sure. Our family was about to face a test like no other. And it was up to us to decide whether we would rise to it or let it break us apart. The walk through the woods that evening felt like an endless journey, the tension thick in the air. Papa, his back straight, but his face filled with the weight of too many unspoken words, led the way. Lavisa, still unaware of the gravity of the moment, skipped along beside me, her bright smile a stark contrast to the rest of us. It was as if she could sense something different, something that had shifted in our family, but she didn't yet understand the full scope of it. She was still so innocent, still holding on to the hope that everything would be okay, that the woman we were going to find would be a source of joy, not more pain. As we walked, I found myself glancing at Papa. His silence was deafening. His face was still hard, stoic, and I couldn't tell if he was ready for this, if he was prepared to confront the woman who had played such a significant role in Mama's life. I knew he had been living with the pain of Mama's death for months, unable to fully heal from the loss. And now, here we were, about to bring her past into the light, to face the very woman who had caused Mama to go out into that storm. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, the fear of the unknown tightening my chest. What would happen when Papa and Sarah finally saw each other? Would it be a reunion, or would the truth tear them apart forever? Would Papa be able to forgive her, to understand the sacrifices Sarah had made? Or would the grief of Mama's death be too much for him to bear? I didn't know, but I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fear that the answer wouldn't be the one I hoped for. When we finally reached the edge of the woods, the familiar sight of Sarah's camp came into view. The firelight flickered in the distance, casting shadows on the trees, and I could see Sarah sitting by the fire, her head bowed in quiet contemplation. Her weathered face was soft in the firelight, and as we approached, I saw her glance up, her eyes locking onto us, locking onto Papa. A brief flash of fear passed over her face, but she didn't move. She didn't run. She simply sat there, waiting for us to come to her. Papa stopped just a few steps away, his face unreadable, his eyes locked on Sarah, as if trying to process what he was seeing. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the weight of the past and the unknown future. "Sarah," Papa said quietly, his voice rough, but it carried the weight of so many unspoken years. Sarah didn't say anything. She just stood, her hands trembling as she wiped her eyes, as if trying to compose herself before facing him. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She was mute, just like before, but in that moment, she didn't need to speak. We all knew what she was feeling. She was afraid, just as Papa was. Afraid of the truth, afraid of the pain that had lingered for so long. I watched as Papa took a step toward her, and for a brief moment, I thought he might turn away, that he might decide it was too much to bear. But then he reached out, slowly, cautiously, and Sarah took his hand. The moment their hands touched, something shifted in the air. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, but it was enough. I could feel in the way Sarah's shoulders relaxed, in the way Papa's face softened, just slightly, as if the weight of everything had been lifted, even if just for a moment. "I'm sorry," Papa said, his voice breaking. "It wasn't what I expected. I thought he might yell at her, accuse her of everything that had happened, of causing Mama's death. But instead, he spoke with a tenderness I hadn't seen in months. It was as if, in that moment, he realized that Sarah hadn't been the cause of Mama's death. She had been a victim of the same grief, the same loss, the same heartache that had consumed our family for so long. And in that moment, I saw the truth. Mama had gone into that storm because she loved Sarah. It wasn't Sarah's fault. It was just the tragic reality of their lives. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she squeezed Papa's hand, and I saw the depth of the pain she had carried all these years. The pain of being separated from her daughter, of losing her, of not being able to protect her from the same pain Sarah had experienced. I could see now that she hadn't been hiding from us out of shame or fear. She had been hiding because she had been carrying her own burden of guilt, the guilt of not being able to be there for Mama, the guilt of not being able to protect her daughter from the life she had led. Papa pulled her into an embrace, and for a moment, everything else faded away. There was no anger, no resentment, just two people holding each other in the aftermath of years of loss and regret. I stood there, watching them, feeling the quiet shift in the air, and I realized something profound. The past had finally been forgiven. The anger, the hurt, the secrets, they had all been released in that one quiet moment. We had faced the truth together, and now we could begin to heal. "You're home now," Papa whispered to Sarah, his voice rough but full of love. It was the first time in so long that he had spoken those words with such meaning. Sarah nodded, her tears falling freely now. She had waited so long for this moment, for this acceptance, for this chance to finally be part of her family again. And now, after so many years of silence, it had come. Slowly, we made our way back to the house, Sarah walking beside Papa, her hand still in his. The weight of the past no longer hung over us. We were walking into a new future, one where we could all finally be together. And as we walked, I realized that this was the beginning of something new. It wasn't just about healing the wounds of the past. It was about creating something new, something that had been lost for so long, but that was finally being found again. We had all been through so much, but now we had each other. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The long journey of grief had finally come to an end. And together, as a family, we would begin again. The days that followed the reunion were filled with a mixture of emotions. The weight of what had been revealed finally sinking into the fabric of our family. Sarah, our nanny, was still finding her place in the home she had been kept from for so long. It wasn't easy for any of us. There were moments of joy, like when Lavisa ran to Sarah every morning with a smile that could light up the room, and moments of deep sorrow, like when Sarah would sit quietly in a corner, her hands resting in her lap as she stared out the window, lost in thought. It was a process slow and delicate, like rebuilding a house after a fire. The foundation had been cracked, but the walls could be mended. Slowly, day by day, the house began to feel like home again. Sarah, despite her silence, began to fill the space Mama had left behind. She was there, in the kitchen, cooking meals with the girls, telling stories about Mama's childhood. Stories I'd never heard before, stories that painted Mama in a light I had never imagined. Every evening, after dinner, we would gather around the fireplace. Papa, though still quiet, would listen intently as Sarah shared more memories of Mama. Memories that had been locked away for so long, hidden in the corners of her heart. Her voice, still shaky and soft from years of silence, would break as she spoke of Mama's early years, of the love they shared before circumstances tore them apart. And though Sarah couldn't speak much, her presence in the house, her gentleness, was enough to heal some of the wounds we had all carried. The house started to feel alive again, the kind of alive it hadn't felt since Mama passed. Lavisa, who had never really understood the weight of the secret Mama had kept, began to sense the shift too. I could see it in the way she looked at Sarah, the way she would touch her arm gently, as if to say, "I'm here." For Lavisa, having a nanny was like discovering a part of herself she didn't know was missing, and it was heartwarming to see her so full of joy, knowing now that the family she thought she'd lost was still here. I watched them, the two of them, sitting at the kitchen table, laughing and talking. Lavisa's eyes would sparkle with questions about Mama, about her childhood, and Sarah would answer with a soft smile, her voice low but full of love. There was a bond between them that I could see was growing every day. There was healing in every touch, every story shared. Papa, too, was beginning to heal. I watched him as he took small steps toward Sarah, toward understanding. He would spend hours with her, going through Mama's old things, sharing memories of the life they had built together. At first, he couldn't speak about Mama's past without a catch in his throat. But as the days passed, his grief started to soften. He began to laugh again, albeit quietly, as Sarah would tell stories of the mischief Mama had gotten into as a child, of the love they had shared. Slowly, it seemed that Papa was not just accepting Sarah into his life, but embracing her as the part of Mama he had never known. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. And that was enough. As for me, I found myself growing stronger. The anger and confusion that had clouded my heart were slowly being replaced with understanding. I had spent so long resenting Sarah, resenting the truth about Mama's death, that I had never stopped to understand the love that had existed between Mama and Sarah. I had never considered the sacrifices Sarah had made, the pain she had lived with for years, watching from a distance as Mama built a life without her. And yet, here she was, reaching out to us, trying to make up for lost time. The woman who had once been a stranger in our lives was becoming a part of our family. Every morning, as Sarah braided Louise's hair, I saw the healing taking place, not just in us, but in her. The quiet connection between Sarah and the girls was something I couldn't explain. It was a simple act, a ritual that had been lost for so long, but it was a way for us to connect with Mama's memory, to keep a piece of her alive. I began to join in, sitting at the table with Sarah as she braided my hair, something Mama used to do every morning. It was a way for me to feel close to her, to feel her presence, even though she was no longer here. I hadn't realized how much I missed that small act until Sarah's hands moved through my hair, recreating the same braid Mama had once woven with such care. It wasn't the same as having Mama back, but it was close. And in those moments, I found a piece of peace. As the weeks passed, we all began to settle into this new normal. It wasn't without its struggles, of course. There were moments when the grief would rise up again, unbidden, when I would catch myself thinking about Mama and the life we had lost. But there were also moments of laughter, moments of connection that filled the house with warmth. We had learned to heal, not just from the pain of Mama's death, but from the secrets that had been buried for so long. We had learned to let go of the anger and the confusion and to open ourselves up to the love that had always been there, even when we couldn't see it. And one morning, as the sun streamed through the kitchen window, Sarah braided Louise's hair, her hands steady and sure, the same way Mama had done every morning. Louise sat in front of her, smiling up at her nanny, her eyes shining with joy. I watched them for a moment, the three of them. Papa sitting at the table, sipping his coffee, his face content for the first time in months, Louise lost in the simple act of having her hair braided, and Sarah, her expression soft, her eyes filled with a love that had been hidden for so long. I realized in that moment that we had become a family again, a real family, with no secrets, no hidden pain. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was ours. The house, which had once felt so cold and empty, was now full of life, full of love. And as I watched Sarah finish the braid and hand Louisa the mirror, I knew that this was just the beginning. We had started a new chapter, one where love would carry us forward, no matter what had happened in the past. We had found our way back to each other, and nothing, not even the darkest of secrets, could ever take that away from us. Together, we were finally whole again,